Good morning. I'm John Kemp. What we're going to be doing today is the advanced training. So the nice thing about it is they're probably a much smaller group. The bad thing about it is we're going to be doing the advanced training, and we're going to be trying to do 56 hours worth of work in 7. And so that's not going to be necessarily real easy to do. So what we're going to do is primarily a broad overview of things, not too broad. I mean, we'll be going into specifics and things, but you're not going to walk out of here necessarily knowing exactly what to click. You'll know how to find it, you'll know what to do, you'll know where to get instructions, you'll understand what it does, and hopefully, that'll be enough for you to get in and actually mess around with it. So, what I have is a kind of an agenda that I've written out. I think for those of you who were here the other days, you can download those agendas from the internet. It's 60 pages of notes. That includes 30 pages for advanced and 30 pages approximately for the basics or fundamentals that we did for the last 2 days.
Where is that available?
Linda has the site. I mean, I had a piece of paper here, but Linda said she was sending it out to everyone, so it should be there. What we're going to be doing is, good, it's here. I have a kind of a directory of about there, that's the page I wanted. So I can kind of give you an idea about what we're going to be doing, and then we'll do it. The first session we're going to deal with is controlling intake, and that's going to deal with the intelligent intake system, the interview system, and canned questions. So hopefully when you get done with that session, you'll have an idea about what each of those can do. You'll have an idea of how to go in and add your own questions and build either an interview system, the intelligent intake system, or add canned questions. Next, what we're going to do in the second session, we're going to be dealing with error checking. Error checking is usually useful from a standpoint of one, understanding what's being checked, but also number two, where it happens and how you can modify it if you want to check for more things or check for less things. This third session, we're going to be looking at form letters and smart duplication. We're going to look at how you can add your own form letters, modify the existing form letters, and how the form letters actually generate and work. And then we're going to also look at smart duplication on how you can go about building your own lists of things. So in smart duplication, you could have a list of things that get duplicated for your housing unit, a list of things that get duplicated if you're running public entitlements, etc. The fourth session is going to be reporting. Reporting is always what people are interested in. We're going to be talking about the simple query builder. I had a person yesterday from New Orleans who said, "Why can't you do this?" And you could. So I learned something yesterday about how to make the simple query builder even more useful, because she suggested trying something and it worked. So we're going to look at the simple query builder. We're going to be looking at custom queries, how to build, save, and modify simple queries. We're going to look at the Access's built-in query builder. Now, normally we spend a whole day on that, the national training, and here it's only part of the session. So you can understand it's going to be a compressed version. We're going to look at adding new reports in the fifth session. I'm going to tell you how you can add new reports into the system, how you can change what suggested reports show up on the Today screen. And the last session, we're going to look at the funding code analyzer, vault, contacts, and project management. Did that help you guys out? That's sort of where we're going to be going today. Okay? Let's go ahead and get started. The first thing that I want to deal with is controlling intake. It should be obvious to folks that you can error check a lot of things that are demographics. You can make sure, for example, that the gender is one of the accepted values. You can make sure that the area code is an accepted area code, that the list of states are the accepted list of states. But one of the things that you have a hard time dealing with is dealing with the substantive issue that the client has come in with. In other words, okay, let's take care of all the demographics. Now, what do I have to ask them about landlord-tenant? Or what do I have to ask them about a consumer case or public entitlements or whatever? And so that's what we want to look at in this session, are the tools that are built in that allow you to go in and actually provide your people, your intake people, with a structured intake that will make things easier and make sure that you have higher quality. Okay. What I'd like to do is start from probably the most simple version and then move to the more complex. We're going to be looking at three things. We're going to be looking at canned questions, we're going to be looking at the interview system, and we're going to be looking at the new intelligent intake system. And so we're going to do it in that order. How many people do use canned notes in the room? Do you know? Some folks do. Canned questions is just a modification or a way of doing canned notes. But instead of just putting in notes, what you end up doing is you're putting in a list of questions. And I've sort of got it in, there we go, separate order here. The way that you find it, and if people have laptops and want to go into their own system and follow along, you can do that. It's not necessary because I will be doing it here. But what you want to do is build a list of questions to provide your people with guidance as to what to ask. And to do that, what we do is we have to have administrative rights. And I'm assuming everybody in the room has those. If we go to admin here, and we go over to set up tables, and what we then do, these are organized according to where the pull downs show up. And since canned questions can show up on callback, they can show up on eligibility, or they can be used on the client record, that's going to mean more than likely it's going to be under multi. So here's multi, and there's canned notes. Do you see that? So canned questions are a derivation of canned notes. If we go into canned notes here, what you're going to see is that we've got a couple options. We can add a new note, or we can modify one. What we're going to do is go in here, and what you'll notice is what controls whether or not something is a question or just a canned note is whether or not it begins with a QA in front of it. Before we actually start building it, or just looking at building it or modifying it, let's look at how it works so you feel a little more comfortable about what I'm talking about. So if I go in here and I go to my open cases, I'm just going to go down and find Janet DeBerry, for example. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go into my case notes. And what I'm going to do is I want to add a new note. And you'll notice now that we have a differentiation between questions and canned notes. So if I go into here, I want to tag these always, discussions with client in this case. I can go in here and you see how it's picked up all of the canned notes that begin with QA. So for example, if I wanted to go in and this was a bankruptcy case that we wanted to go through, I could choose bankruptcy. And what happens is it gives me a list of questions that deal with bankruptcy. Everybody see that? Now, this is the easiest thing to set up of the three different methods, but it's also the least useful in a couple instances or a couple reasons. Number one is you always get the same list of questions. You know, whether or not, no matter what type of bankruptcy or what answers you get, it doesn't matter. You still have the same list of questions that are going to go into your notes, unless you have a different group of them. In other words, you might have bankruptcy 1, bankruptcy 2, bankruptcy 3, but as a practical matter, it just puts in your list of questions into the system. The second problem that you have is that they aren't arranged in fields at all. They're just open text. So are there any judgments? I could put in anything I want next to that and just continue, and it doesn't error check it at all. So if you're looking for dollars, if you're looking for yes, no, if you're looking for a date, it doesn't enforce any of that. The third problem with it is report writing on it is basically non-existent because it's just free-form text, and because it's not tested. You could in fact say try to find this and this in the notes, but it's not going to be extremely easy to get information out if you want that. Does everybody understand that? Okay. And as I said earlier, if we go to page 1 and we review eligibility here, you'll notice that there's a list, the same list of questions shows up here. Now, the list of questions that are in here are ones that actually show up from a program in Minnesota. So obviously they're not sculptured necessarily to Louisiana. So what you want to be sure to do is you want to be sure to go in and check those to make sure that they fit what you need. And the way that you do that is the way we started. I'm going to go through it again here so you feel comfortable about it. I'm going to close out of here, I'll close out of here, I'll close out of here. And what I'm going to do is go to admin. I'm going to go to, I want to find set up tables here. And what I'm going to do is scroll down until I see canned notes. And when I click on canned notes, what ends up happening is that it brings up the canned note page. And this allows you to either add a new canned note or it allows you to modify one. I'm going to go down and modify it, bankruptcy. You can see it gets a unique number that was already assigned to it. You can say where it's usually showing up. In this case, it says, we mostly use it on an intake sheet, although you could use it elsewhere. And then I suggest certain codes in here. About the only code that's absolutely necessary that you use for questions is Q&A, because the pull downs are set up so that the questions and answers look at those first two letters, and if they're Q&A, it includes it in the questions pull down. But if it's the other canned notes, it'll be excluded from those other canned notes if it's Q&A. Does that make sense to people?
So, like that, QA?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. So that you notice here the unique note name,
Mm-hmm.
it's QA bankruptcy. That makes it show up in the pull down so that you can actually find it. Now, if we wanted to modify this, it'd be a simple thing to do. We would just go through these notes, not notes, but through these questions, and we would make the changes that we wanted to make, and that's all that would be necessary. Another nice thing about this feature is that the questions that go in, it doesn't really matter if you change them midstream. So if you use them for 6 months and then you change the questions, it's not going to affect anything. Whereas in some of the systems, you've got to be careful. You don't want a question that used to say, how many children do you have? You don't want that changed to be, how many days notice did you get from the landlord? Because you might end up thinking that the person has 30 children, because you've reused that question, so you have to be careful about that. Does that make sense to people? Here, because it's sort of free form, it really doesn't matter. So you could go ahead and change this whole list of questions at any point in time that you wanted to.
And who's asking these questions?
Well, that's policy decisions. And that's, I think, what you could do is actually, if you follow up on that, you could in fact have a set of questions that would be basic for the eligibility slip that might be used by your intake people. And you might then have a set of questions that are used by advocates. Now, sometimes advocates will get, I don't want to say snooty, but they will get, they will be like, I don't need that, I've been in practice for forever. And I think that that the reason that a list of questions is good for an advocate, even if they've been in practice for 30 years, is that it acts as a check that if you've done 5 of these things today, 5 wills or 5 landlord tenants, I know when I was in practice, by the end of the day, I would be sitting there going, did I tell this person, about, joint checking? Or was it the last 4 people I told, but I haven't told this person? So if you have a list, kind of just a script there of questions, by just clicking them off, you're sure that you haven't forgotten something that's important. And so I think that's a good point, that you can in fact structure any of the questions to be used by any of the people that you want. I mean, you could have intake paralegals, receptionists, you can have all kinds of different questions available for different people. This is just a text box. So one of the things that you could do to save time is you could ask a unit, give me a word list in Microsoft Word of what you would want to have as a set of questions for child custody, for example. What you could then do is just copy that list and paste it in. And if they send it to you in a Word document, you wouldn't have to retype it.
Many units already have something,
Well, yeah.
on paper that they've been using forever.
Well, I was a firm believer in this. When I was in West Virginia, there were 4 programs, and what they would do is they would always send all the new attorneys through my office because I was very organized. And we used to always have manuals with checklists for like domestic and landlord tenant and stuff, so that people would have at least a basis for starting. And that was kind of the idea behind this, is it's just taking that checklist and dropping it into the computer so it's connected with the case itself. I don't know if there's
I do have a question.
Yeah, good.
Okay, so the generation of these questions, how do you actually input them in? Is this the screen?
this is it. You just go here and you type it in.
Okay,
So if I wanted to get rid of when did the client last work, I just hit delete. If I wanted to say when did the client last have employment, I would just get rid of last work and say have employment.
So
and
what
if you don't mind, how do you get to that list again?
Okay, I'll show.
Because I'm working on here and I'm not accessing it. Working from the first screen.
Yeah, that's what I showed you. I'll show you it again. I'll show you this third. If we go to admin, you have to have an admin permission.
Oh, you have that admin permission.
Oh yeah.
So like
That's the
you've got admin permissions, but I mean, if you don't, so that may be, but so if you have admin permission, like, let's say you decided, I wanna help streamline intake, so I'm gonna, and I'm talking about for intake workers, or, not necessarily the attorney. So I wanna have a set of questions that really helps us screen for stuff within our case acceptance guidelines, and maybe get some basic information for the attorney, or something like that. And so, like, we could, as administrators, we could work with our staff, come up with the questions, which probably already exist, but maybe on paper. Come up with the questions, dump them in canned notes.
Put
and then-
QA in front of them, yeah. Remember, you have to put the QA in front of the name.
Right, and dump them in there, and then, everyone sees it, or just certain people?
No, everyone would see it.
Everyone will see it, okay.
Yeah, when you go to either,
And then it goes into case notes or something?
it is part of case
Got
notes.
it.
It really is case notes. It
Yeah.
doesn't go in, it's just there.
Got it.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like automatically typing something into case notes, but instead of typing in, client told me, basically it puts in the list of questions, and then next to those questions, you type in
Sounds
your
like
answers.
it's sort of like those interview questions we had for foreclosure
Mhm.
and stuff.
Yeah.
Yep,
Yeah, well, that's the next level we're gonna be looking at.
okay.
So, what you would do is, like I said, you would go here, you would go to admin, you go to set up tables. The candidates, since they're usable from callback, they're usable from eligibility, they're usable from the client record, they're usable from multiple areas. We go to multi down here, we try to kind of group them by where they show up. Here's multi and here's canned notes. We double click, And as I said, all the questions would begin with Q&A. And so you'd go down here and you'd pick bankruptcy or whatever you wanted to change. And you could go in here and change the questions for adoptions. Now, if you wanted to add a new one, you would just click add. This would all be blank except for the number. You'd probably choose this for IN. You could even create a new value here that might be QA if you wanted, because questions and answers can show up under callback, eligibility, and clients. So you might even create a new tag there if you wanted, so that you don't say, well, it just shows up in the client intake sheet. It can show up on all three of them. And then you could tag it that way, but the most important thing is here. You have to begin this with QA for it to show up in the pull down, okay? That's about all there is. I mean, this one is probably the easiest and simplest to set up. Yeah, do you have a question?
So how do you access it from the client? If you're in the client intake?
Yeah, I've already showed that, but I'll show it again. Maybe I started it earlier. But what you would do is you would go in, and we can do it from either clients or eligibility or callback. What I'll do is I'll go to my client search, I'll say show all, I'll pick one client, doesn't matter, Robert McDonald. That's funny. I must be in a place that's convenient because I keep picking that just randomly. That's funny. If we go to can notes here, what we could then do is we could say add a note and say what we did, discussions with witness, discussions with client, and here are your canned notes, here, and here are your canned questions. You see them? So you just click on it, and it drops those questions in to your notes, and then you just type the answers next to it. Okay? Any other questions? Okay. The next level that we're going to move up to in terms of putting in questions and things is we're going to be looking at the old interview system. Now I understand that you all used it for closures. But let's sort of step back for a second and sort of think about how you should develop the questions for either one of these three systems, and then sort of think about how they're going to be used. I think it's important that you probably plan it beforehand on paper rather than just start typing it in. I think it would be useful. I know it's especially important in the last step, the intelligent intake system, because that branches. So depending upon what sort of answer you get, you go to a different question. And so you need to structure that out in a flow chart. If anybody's ever done, the flow charting with the and the if, ors, things.
Here, yes.
Yeah, exactly. That would be a good thing to kind of lay out, and then test the questions as you go through. The second thing that you want to have as a policy decision is you want to make sure that you've decided how you want to tag the questions. Now, how would it be logical to set up questions so you'd find the set of questions that you needed? What could you use to tag them? Go ahead.
Well, our office is divided into different units, so
Possibly unit. We use 4 methods. One, you could tie them to problem code. So you could say, show me all the lists of questions under a certain problem code. The difficulty with that is problem codes are usually pretty broad. So what would you rather do? Would you rather do a list of questions for dealing with a lockout? Or would you rather deal with a list of questions for a landlord-tenant case? Can you see the difference in scale? I mean, is this an eviction? Is it a needed repair? The landlord-tenant set of questions becomes extremely crazy.
Yeah,
Whereas if you can narrow it down, it becomes much easier to structure a set of questions that becomes meaningful. So what do we have that breaks up the problem code? Yeah, the special problem code, where you can take the normal problem code like 37, and you can divide it up into 37.0 all the way, or 37.00 all the way to 3799, so it allows 100 subdivisions under every problem. So you could have a list of questions. If you tied it to that, you could have a list of questions, for example, for a divorce with children, a divorce with children with violence, you know, you could have all kinds of different types of questions in there. Another possibility is there's the National Index Code in there. And that's the code that the corporation put out, then modified, then abandoned, and then who knows what's going on. But it's in there, and there's about, I'm not sure if there's 1,500 subdivisions in there.
We don't want that.
Yeah, you can tie into that. And lastly, and this is kind of useful, is you could in fact have a set of custom question lists. So you could have a question list called a receptionist, or you could have a custom list called airship property, or you could have a custom list called HIV, you know, because HIV sort of transcends a lot of different subject areas. So those are the 4 major ways. So when you start putting it together, what you want to ask yourself is, how would it be easiest for my staff to find things? And usually you should probably limit it to just 2 categories. You don't want them to say, well, for some of them you go to problem code, for some of them you go to National Index Code, for some of them you go to the sub-special problem code, and then for some of them you go to a named list, because it gets more confusing. Okay, so those are some basic setups for the next 2 things we're going to be talking about. You kind of want to get together and think about how you want to do that. Okay, I'm kind of doing this out of order from what I was planning on it, because I thought it made more sense to start with the simplest version and then move to the next one, rather than going from the more complex to the the simplest. Let's take a look at an example interview using the existing interview system that you all have, okay? To do that, what we do is go to page 2, and there's Start Edit Interview. Do you see that down there? So when you click on this, what it does is it says, do you want to start a new interview, resume an old interview, show old interviews on case, relate other interviews to this case, or print a list of interviews for this case? If we're starting a new interview, start a new interview. One of the first things in either of these systems we're going to be looking at is it's going to ask you, who are you interviewing? If it's the client, you could probably just go ahead and start, right? What if it isn't the client? What if it's somebody else you're interviewing? What might be a concern of yours? Yeah?
This person might be a conflict.
Perfect. That's exactly what I was looking for. So if you go in here and you say, this is not the client, notice what it does is it gives you the ability, number 1, to write down who you're interviewing. There is a relationship choice here. If they're actually like related, it uses the same one as on family. But you know, you can in fact say, this person is okay, because you can also do conflict check here. So you can actually conflict check the person. You know, if you're interviewing, let's say, an adult child who lives with a senior who's your client, you might find out that you've added that person into the adverse parties as a potential adverse party, because there might be financial abuse, where the adult child is taking the money from your senior client. And so you want to be careful. That's an example of where you might run into a conflict. You know, so you might be interviewing a witness who turns out who's actually the landlord or something, somehow related to the landlord. So, you know, that's why you would want to do the conflict check to make sure. In this case, what we're going to do is just say that this person, are you following me so far? We're just starting a new interview. What we're going to do is go in here and say, yes, it is the client, to make it simple. And then it puts us in here. Remember, the first thing that I talked about was, how do you group your questions? And that's what we're dealing with right now. We're dealing with, how do we want to group these questions? How do we find them? So, search by. Well, we're gonna look for our questions by, word isn't very good because what that's gonna do is bring up questions based upon just a word rather than a, you know, like if you ask for custody, it might give you all the questions dealing with custody, but in no particular order. What we're gonna do is, we're gonna look, I know I have a set of questions under problem code, which I remember I said wasn't a good idea, okay? So, it's okay. I mean, I just put them in here to make it easy to find. And what I'm gonna deal with is domestic abuse, all right? So if we click on domestic abuse, one of the things that happens here, unlike what we'll see in the new intelligent intake system, is it shows you all of the questions in a particular order all at once, okay? And every person gets the same list of questions, unless you jump around inside of the interview. So in other words, here's your script, here's the questions, no matter what they answer, you just keep going down through these questions. Do you understand that? Yeah, okay. So let's go through the interview. I'm gonna automatically advance to the next question. That just saves you trouble. Have you been physically abused or threatened with bodily harm? I'll say, I don't know, does anybody remember if this is male or female?
It was somebody McDonald, I think.
Oh, Ronald McDonald, so it's gonna be male. I'm gonna say, she
You can't assume.
broke
Better go back and check.
my leg. She broke my leg. Okay, now you can, in fact, the interviewer can write comments about the question, such as, you know, client's leg was in a cast and he had x-rays. You see? So you can kind of qualify that. You then store the answer and that moves you automatically, if this is checked, to the next question. How do you know the person who harmed or threatened you? She lives with me.
Why?
Yeah, you could say. I mean, this is particularly hard, as you're aware, for men to come in and say this. We had some, I remember, in my practice, where the woman jumped on the roof of his car and was jumping up and down and dented it and stuff. But it's really hard for men to admit that because it's very non-macho. So, all right, if we store the answer here, we can keep moving. Now, what I can do here is, I'm going to skip some questions here because it's not important we go through the complete interview, but I wanted to show you a couple of features. First off, have you called the police or sheriff? I'm going to click here. It says, are you sure you want to skip? And I'm going to say yes. Have you called the police or sheriff? I didn't know I could. What does that kind of bring up in your mind? Wouldn't it be nice at this point to tell them what their rights are? Okay? And that's where what we have, that tab in there that says applicable advice. I can go here and this pulls up all the advice we have in the system having to deal with you know, 37, which is domestic abuse, and it says, is battering a crime? So what I might do is I might say to the client, well, you know that no one has a right to touch or threaten me, and that if they do, they can be thrown in jail. And you know, this is obviously Virginia law, but if it was modified for Louisiana law, that would be rather useful to be able to give that person that piece of advice, so in the future, they know that they're protected or at least have some rights. Now,
Is this stuff already in the
Yeah.
system?
yes,
This stuff is already in
Yeah.
the system? We just have to modify it?
yeah,
Got it.
no, you should say cool.
Cool.
All right, that's good. All right, now what you can do is hit save advice with comment. So I click that, and now when I go back to continue my interview, let me go back here to the interview. Sorry, I conduct interview. You'll notice it now becomes part of my interview. Is everybody following? Even the back row back there? You guys don't need binoculars? You're okay? All right. Yep.
The advice given, is that just general advice? It's not legal advice, right? Am I correct?
Well, that's your determination, not
Okay,
mine.
because the person who's doing the intake is not allowed to give legal advice. So it's just
That's a policy decision.
Right.
Because it could be the lawyer
Right.
doing the
Oh, I
interview
see,
and
okay.
using this. It could be a paralegal. You might consider this when you just tell them the law says. You may say that's not giving advice. You're not
That's what you're
applying. Advice usually is
Yeah.
Isn't it like answering a law school question? You say, this is the law, these are the facts, and then you apply the facts to the law, right? And that's usually when you write an exam, that's what you do. When you write a bar, you take a bar, you do that. And that's kind of the advice. Here, all you're stating is this is what the law says.
Yeah, and so what you're saying, basically, you can use the interview system, the person who's conducting, the intake person can use the interview system, and also the attorney can use the interview system.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a policy decision. I'm not telling you to do it one way or the
Yeah,
other.
yeah.
I'm just saying these are the capabilities, and there would be a good argument that you're not applying facts to the law at this point. You know, you're just saying, you know, you have a right not to be beat up. So, yeah, legal information maybe. Okay. Yeah.
On his, so if we have the intake person go through these questions and answer, and then can I go back and re-ask some of the same questions?
Oh, absolutely.
And with not losing the intake.
Right.
But then saying, okay, I advise that, you know, you really need to go, you need to call the police.
Yeah, yeah.
And add to this?
Yeah, I mean, because they're in notes, you know, you can edit notes. And
Oh,
these,
so all of this is just gonna go in notes and then I can.
well, yes and no. They will actually be saved. It's automatically saved in its own tables. So when you're done with an interview, it's sitting over here. Now you have a choice. You can restart that interview, or if the person sent the interview to case notes, it's going to have the questions, the answers, the advice that was given in the notes, and you could just go into the notes and supplement them. You might say, I noticed here that we told you legal information. Was that what we were saying? We gave you, you know, information about the law. Let me apply it to your situation. In your situation, you know, you got hit by someone who was a relative or was a, you know, a significant other who was living with you, and the law says that you have rights that they can't do that. You know, I mean, you see what I'm saying? And then you could type that into the notes underneath the interview. I'll show you that in a second. So what you can do here is we'll store this answer, and then we're going to look at one other feature that's available in the system. And that is, if I go down here, is do you have somewhere safe to go? It says, are you absolutely sure you want to skip these? I'm going to say yes. Now, if I say yes, nothing happens. Is this an important feature? I mean, is this an important question? Well, yeah. You want your client to be safe. I know when I first started practice, our office in Tacoma had lost a client. The abuser killed her, you know, and so the office was kind of in shock, you know, and I was a new lawyer coming on board as a VISTA lawyer. And I knew that, you know, that's just, so having somewhere safe for the person to go is important. So if the person says no, they don't have somewhere to go, what it does is it kicks in something called a programmed response that you can program in. So that if you get a particular type of answer, you can prompt the interviewer or the interviewee to do something. Here, we're prompting the interviewer to say, it says here, give the client the phone number of the nearest shelter. The shelter phone numbers for branches, that was when I helped start, is this, YWCA is this, and WEAVE is this, you see?
What if,
Now, what would happen?
With how big our service areas are now, there's so many different places.
Well, then you would put them in, or you could put them
Does
there.
it get, particularized by, like,
Yes,
what
no.
office the person is calling, and
Yes,
different
no.
ones pop up? No, so
Yes,
you would
no.
just have to dump them all there.
Well, I mean, you know, you could have a set of questions for the northern part of your program. You could have the same set of questions, but localized for the
Yeah,
southern.
that's what I'm trying to figure out.
You could do that. Or you could just say, look up on your desk manual for which appropriate shelter for the, you know, to refer the client to. Because you might not have that, like you said, you might have a whole list of them.
Yeah, we probably have
So,
about 8.
but there's no reason why you wouldn't be able to list them or not, so. All right, here, I complied with the programmed response, I left it there, and I'm gonna put in a comment, and I'm gonna say, got the client and his daughter a bed at And so I can now save that, save with prompt. I'll store the answer. And so do you believe your spouse will follow you? I'm not gonna finish this. I'm gonna say the interview's done. I'm gonna go over here to review the interview. And here are my questions. I can rearrange them. I can review them. I could put a general interview comment down here if I wanted to, generally about what happened during the interview. The interviewee was drunk. The interviewee was in pain. The interviewee was extremely cooperative. I mean, whatever you wanted to do, you could put down there that might be applicable. For example, the interviewee's now staying with his mother, and the phone number of his mother is such and such. So you can use that comment to gather any information, just generally about the interview. Now, you have a choice once you've got it here. Number one is you could print it out. And if you print it out here, what you have is your questions, the answers. Here you've got advice that's integrated in. And here you actually have the programmed response. Here's a place for the signature of the person being interviewed, and here's a signature for the person who's conducting the interview. So if you want to use that, you don't have to have them sign it. One of the offices we worked with wanted to have a signature line on that. I think LSC requires a signed fax statement or something. Yeah, yeah. So that's why it's on there. Now, what you also have the option to do here is if we close the preview here and go here, you also can send it to your case notes. And what I'm going to do is it's been sent to the case notes. Now, here's a little trick. The problem that we have is that the case notes haven't been refreshed. In other words, it doesn't know those notes are part of the group of notes that apply to this client. It's very easy to fix that. You just go to notes here. And if you just go to edit notes, it's now refreshed it. Here is the interview we just did. I can do edit zoom. Here's what we just did. She broke my leg. How do you know? This is now part of your case notes. This answers your question in the back. You had a question about whether or not you could edit the case notes. Excuse me? You had that question about answering the case notes or editing them. We're in case notes right now, so you could just go right in here and your question was, well, what can I just add to it as the attorney? Well, yeah, this is where you just start typing in, because we moved it into the case notes. So it's not only stored separately over here, but it's also been put in with the case notes. All right. Does everybody follow along with this so
Would it
far?
only save the changes in the case notes, and it would leave the original questions
Yes.
untouched?
Yeah. If she did it that way. Otherwise, if she reopened the interview up, it might. She could probably mess around with the main interview. Okay. All right. We've looked at how it works. That's kind of the easy part. What I now want to do is show you where you can go to modify and create your own, okay? And again, in the time we have, this is, we could spend half a day dealing with how to do it. So we're going to just kind of give you an idea. Hopefully, there's documentation, not hopefully, I know there is, but it should be also some self-explanatory. First off, we obviously don't have everybody, or don't allow everybody to go in. Because you can see what it would just, especially if you had unskilled people going in there and they get partially through setting something up or they set it up wrong. So it's going to be limited to the admins. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to close out of this case, and I'm going to go to admin, and I'm going to go to setup, and what I'm going to do is go to the interview system. Everybody follow?
Right.
If I go to the
Setup.
manage the interview system. This allows you to add or edit a list of questions. As you can see here, what you can do is you can go in and search by, and you can actually pull up those list of questions that are in there. You could say, I want to pull up the questions for here. And now I could actually go in and add a new question. I could go in and I could do a whole series of things. You know, you can put new questions in. You can reorder the questions once they've been put in, so you can push them up and down. One question goes, unlike the intelligent intake system, you can put a question into the system and it goes into a question pool. You could then use that one question in 5 different sets of groups of questions. So for example, are you married? Well, you might take that and put that in the bankruptcy questionnaire. You might put that in a child custody questionnaire. You might put it in a domestic abuse questionnaire. But it's the same question, you're just associating it with different lists. The intelligent intake system doesn't do that because it's more complicated. Okay. You also have the ability in here of adding responses. You can do programmed responses. So for example, if I search by problem code and I go to 37 and do you have somewhere safe to go? You see there's the programmed response. This is what we got when we answered no. And you see right here it says question number. If the client's answer is no, this is the prompt that shows up. All right? So let's close this down. You can also build a custom list of questions here. You can edit issues and advice. So you can go in here and you can put in an issue is more or less the question. So for example, what do I do about a lawsuit against me which was filed far away from where I live? And here's the advice. You could go in and modify that advice to fit Louisiana law. This would be a good thing to use for the case management working group, because it would, why reinvent the wheel in each separate program? It might be best to coordinate this throughout the different programs so that everybody gets the benefit and you don't just keep, you know, recreating the same thing over and over and over again. Are you following me? Okay. So there's a set of utilities. Here also there's reports on interviews. You see answers with no interview, interview with no answers, blank answers, problem codes with no questions. So these are reports that you can run that kind of help you kind of make sure that you don't have any goofy interviews in there that don't have any information, or you have, it's a way of kind of making sure everything is running smoothly. That's the interview system. That's kind of a brief introduction to it. What we want to now do is we want to look at the intelligent intake system. We just developed that with Memphis area under a TIG grant, and we're going to be, I think we've got a TIG grant through Northern Virginia to make it applicable to the eligibility slip. Right now, we're going to look at it from the standpoint of the client interview. So let's go ahead and look at that. Before we do that, let's talk briefly about why it's different. First off, in the intelligent intake system, you only get one question on the screen at a time. Okay, so it's kind of like TurboTax. Yeah. When you answer that, you go on to the next question. Number 2 is that you can branch in the system. And what I mean by that is, if I say to you, if you're doing an airship case about property, is the property located in Louisiana? If they say no, it might just take you to the end of the interview. Because the property is not located in Louisiana, we don't know what law governs it. You need to contact the legal aid office located in the state in which the property is, you see? But if they say yes, it is there, it can continue to go. That's branching. We only do 2 branches, except when you do lists where you could list, for example, all the parishes in Louisiana. Depending upon which parish they live in, you might have it give them a different piece of advice. So you could do lists with multiple advice. But we thought making more than 2 branches would just be, it would drive, it's hard enough to have just 2 branches. It drives people crazy. So we thought that would be enough. Now, it doesn't have to be just a yes/no question. In the interview system we just saw, and in the intelligent intake system, you can have in the interview system 6 types of answers. It can be text, it can be money, it can be a number, it can be a date, it can be a yes/no answer, and it can be a letter. Okay, not like Dear Mr. Jones, but more like A, B, C, D, E, like that. Okay. It's the same in the intelligent intake system, except that it adds something called a list. Like I said, a list of all of the parishes in Louisiana. Now, the second thing it does besides branching is that it allows you to loop. And it allows you to loop. Let's take an example about, do you have any children? Well, if the client says no, are you going to ask them what the child's name is? Well, it doesn't make much sense, does it? So in that case, it would branch away to the next set of questions. But if they say yes, you might say, what is the child's name? What is the child's gender? What is the child's birth date? Do you have any more children? If you say yes, it loops back and asks you those same questions. But if you say no, it branches to the next and continues with the interview. Do you see? So those two things are very significant, or three things. Single question on the screen. Secondly, branching. And third, looping. And what that means in effect is that each client might have a totally separate type of interview. Like if I interview you, you might only have 2 questions. Is the property in Louisiana? You say no, and then I say, okay, do you have any other questions? We can't help you. Whereas if I interview you, we might go through the whole airship and we might have 25 different answers in yours. And because you might have 2 more children than she does, we might have 35 answers for you. So we could have we could have 25 and we could have 35 for the same question. But it becomes more functional and useful if we do it that way. Do you understand? Let's take a look at it, okay? What I like, on the first day, some of you weren't here, what I like to say is that this is an awful lot like using a cell phone, okay? You have to commit some of your time to knowing what those apps do. And if you don't do that, you're not going to be able to use functions in the system. And the key thing is, to concentrate your time and effort on those things that you see as being necessary and useful, and then let the other apps wait until later. So that's, you just understand. And the other thing that I said during the first day were certain things in the system need to be set up. You can't do certain things in the system unless they've been set up. It just makes sense. I'll go to my first day notes if I can find them. And I gave a list of things that have to be set up, just as an example. And I thought that might be useful to kind of go through, unfortunately. Well, it's pretty obvious that things such as the interview system have to be set up, the funding code analyzer has to be set up, the intake system has to be set up. I mean, unless you have things in there, canned notes have to be set up. If you click on canned notes and there aren't any, you're not going to be able to use it. If you click on, now in some instances I give you defaults, which is I think what you asked. For example, in terms of form letters, I give you a set of form letters in there, but you can go in and modify them and add additional ones. So we're just talking about how a lot of features you can't use unless you spend some time setting them up.
Yeah.
Now, let's go ahead and look at an interview using the intelligent intake system. So what I'm going to do is go to client search. Coming up with these names for things is such a pain. I needed to have it called something else, so we just made that name up. So I'm going to do Nathaniel Richardson. Now, the last significant difference in the intelligent intake system, and this is extremely cool, is that you can generate documents using it. You can generate letters, you can generate pleadings, you can generate a whole bunch of stuff. And that's cool. Let's go ahead and look at an interview here, an intake. So I go to page 2. This is what we just did here. but this is the intake system. That's the intelligent intake system. If I go in here, this shows me a list of all the interviews that or intakes that I've done. I don't have any. I could generate documents from here if I wanted to. I could, in fact, examine the interview and print it out. I could do other things. But what I'm going to do is a new interview. Pretty straightforward. You just click on new interview. First thing it asks us is choose the list of questions. Remember the 4 things? Is it a custom list? Is it a problem code? Is it a special problem code? Is it a national index? You see them right here? I'll pick custom. I'm going to pick airship property, real property from parents. I could write a beginning comment about this. The client had to drive 3 hours to the interview, you know, to talk to us about this, or you know, the client, you know, needs to get us some papers, and she will fax them to us or whatever. Is the person being interviewed the client? Same question. If you say no, you can go through and do a conflict check. If you say yes, you can start your interview. Now this is a lot simpler for the interviewer because there's just a single question. You see it on the screen. So, is the property in Tennessee? If I say no, we're gone. You know, we're out of the interview because this was done for Memphis area. So I'm going to say yes. I could write a comment in, save. Did your parents leave a will? Well, if they did, it's going to have to be probated, therefore we're out. But they didn't, so we're going to continue through. Save, next question. Is there a mortgage? If there is a mortgage, we're out because the mortgagee has rights to you know, a claim against the property. You can't just give it away to somebody. So I'm going to say no. Save, next question. Is there a person not related to the deceased who can testify as to the place and date of death? If you say no, you're out. You need that. I'll say yes. And save. Can the same person who's not related also verify the surviving heirs? Ah, look what I have down here. I put in a prompt to help. So I said an heir is a surviving spouse, children, children of the deceased, children of adopted children. So it helps the interviewer ask the interviewee what is an heir. You might not know what an heir is, but it means kind of anybody who's related, or you know. And you could read this off to the person. This person will say they can't confirm that. Save, next question. Can the same person testify as to whether or not there is a will or not? Yes. Can the same person testify as to whether or not the estate debts have been paid? Yes. Bam. We've kind of gotten to the end of the interview because those were all the conditions that were necessary to apply heirship. And so now what we've done, you see this tab, it's called applicable advice. It's actually giving you the advice here saying, based on the information, we advise you to file a form called affidavit as to heirs. The form needs to be filled out, et cetera, et cetera. Does that make sense? Now what we can do is, it says click on the question tab to proceed. Did you give this person the advice? Well, I hope so. I mean, it's sitting right in front of you. So we'll say yes. And we'll say save, next question. Your interview's over. Do you have any other questions for me? No.
Yeah, why don't you do my cake?
Yeah. Save, next interview.
Being ready.
And now what we've got here is we now have a very similar sheet to the other one, which is it allows us to print. And if we click here, there's a printout. You see it with all the questions and the answers, with the advice that was given in there. So it follows that kind of general model that we had before. What I'm going to do is close that. But you can also send it to case notes. So it's now been added to case notes. But here's where it's different. You can in fact generate a document. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to generate a opening letter to the client. All right? Click. The sender is going to be Thomas Jeffers or whatever. It's going to use this letterhead, and I'm going to generate the letter. There it is. Dear Mr. Richardson, you told us certain things during the interview. The property in question is in Tennessee. You indicated that your parents did not leave a will. You told us there was not a mortgage on them. So this was a simple letter I put together just to kind of demonstrate what it can do. All right?
If you could generate your affidavit from this.
Yeah,
document.
anything you want. Pleadings, you do. You can even be prompted for what's the cause of action and what court is it in, and to put it into the heading. There's all kinds of ways you can do things, generate documents.
Within that document, it can make it look like grammatically correct?
Yes, I just slammed this out.
Okay.
I mean, this was.
Oh, we don't want a member of my staff sending a letter.
No, I know that. This is just.
I'm just making
So that's
sure.
editable.
I'm just making sure.
Oh, yeah, no, you have to set it up. If the client, now, what I wanted to do is to show you this, because I wanted to now show you what happens in an interview that doesn't go like this.
Okay.
So we're gonna do another interview, and it's not gonna go the same way at all, all right?
Okay.
So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna close this, and I'm gonna do a new interview with this client, okay? If we refresh it, it will show that interview in there, see it? But I'm gonna do a new interview. I'm gonna do custom, I'm gonna do airship. What did I do? I picked special problem, put custom. I'm gonna pick airship here, and I'm gonna say it's the client. Yes. And start the interview. Is the property in Tennessee? No. Okay.
Okay.
No. Save, next question. Did you offer the caller informational materials and refer the client to the private bar? Yes. That's it. I'm out of the interview. Now, let's generate the letter. Dear Mr. Richardson, you told us during the interview that the property is not located in Tennessee. Since our representation is limited to Tennessee, we recommend you contact the legal aid program in the state where the property is. That's pretty cool, isn't it? You know, that it would generate, depending upon the type of answer you get, it would generate a correct answer or a different type of letter. All right. Now if I could spend 2 hours, I could show you how it's done. But what we're going to do is briefly go over where you find it and how it's set up. And these examples are in the system, and you should have the airship and a couple other examples so you can actually go in and see how it's done. But first off, where are we going to find how to set this up? Anyone?
Under the intake. Oh, the admin.
Admin.
Oh, yeah. Right.
All of this, remember, that should be the answer all day long is admin.
Got it.
Because we don't want everybody just running rampant in here. So if we go in here, you'll notice there's a button that says intake system. If we click on this, this is the intelligent intake script administration. And you can add a fixed group in here. You can add or edit questions to that fixed group. You can add documents. And those documents, there's certain things that can be done in the system. Let's see if I can edit one. Add edit questions. Let's see. Let me see. What do I want to edit? Choose question in a group. Let me see. I'm sorry. I did this probably months ago. So yeah, this is the advice that you can go in and edit. These are the questions that you can kind of go in. But what we're looking for is you have the ability to pull up an existing one. Is there an airship property? There it is right here. Let's do that. And let's do add edit questions. Let's see if it's in there. Just question, choose question in the group. No, it's still not right. Let's do close here. Yeah, here's the list of questions. This shows you the logic in it. It says here, is the property in Tennessee? What type of answer is it? Y or N? Yes or no? The action, if yes, go to 1, otherwise go to 2. That's what that's saying. If 1, it goes to question 55, which is here. If no, it's going to go to 63, which is down here. Did you offer the client information? You See? Here, did your parents leave a will? It's a yes or no answer. So there's a whole series of ways you can set up questions, not only are yes or no's, but also you can set them up so they're dollar amounts, number amounts. If their income is below a certain amount, you can answer and have it do one thing. If it's somewhere else, you can do another thing. It could be a list of a list in there of all your parishes. You know, if it's parish Orleans, then go to question 62, which would say, because you live in Orleans, there is an implied warranty of habitability, therefore you should do this and that, or we have to ask you these additional questions. It's the same sort of thing that you do when you set up a document itself. If we edit a document here, let's go to opening letter on airship. What you've got in here is begin the document. You've got airship. You can pick the question here. Is the property in Tennessee? Bang. If action number one, remember if go to 1, then go to 2. Well, here in the document it says, if the client's answer is yes, you told us certain things during the interview. The property in question is Tennessee. If the answer was no, you see this? What it does is it says you told us during the ADP stands for add paragraph to the document. You told us during the interview that the property was not located in Tennessee. So right there's your branching in the document. You know, if they answer one thing, it goes this direction. If they answer another, it goes that direction. So if you didn't like the grammatical letter, you would just go into that top part up there and just edit it, you know, to say what you wanted it to say. I just slammed it out to get it to work. So that's how you go about this utility. And there is a lot of documentation about it that walks you through it. We're 10 minutes over the time that we had, but to kind of summarize what we looked at is that you have the ability to control the quality of the intake you do. Number one is the demographics take care of themselves. Gender, area code, what state are they in. What we had talked about in this session was how do you control the substantive part of the interview, how you deal with the legal issues. And what I did is I gave you 3 choices. Number 1, canned questions, probably the easiest to do, all right? But also probably the least useful because you can't generate documents, you can't, you know, have programmed responses and things like that. The second thing I showed you was the interview system, which you all use right now for foreclosures. And then number 3, I showed you the new intelligent intake system, which allows branching, it allows looping, it allows generation of documents, it changes the number of questions the person gets. This comes out of the scary mind of James Spencer. I did the programming, but James had the ideas, and it was frightening. It was like this attic with spiders and bats. James is a very, very bright guy. And so we went through this and developed all the concepts, and then I went back through and implemented it. So. All right, are there any questions? All right, let's take a 5-minute.
I have one question. So in terms of like, who can see questions? So if you wrote questions for attorneys as opposed to intake staff, can your potentially pro bono volunteers also see those questions and ask those questions and give advice through the portal?
I don't think the portal utilizes the interview system or the intake system.
Could it?
Well, anything could be used. Yeah. I mean, basically, we write everything. Nobody's ever asked for that. We were happy to get it to work.
No, it's just a question. I just didn't know if like.
It would probably be possible.
There were
you know.
maybe some basic things.
I mean, I could see that being very useful if you send out something to like a new attorney who's not used
That's
to
what I'm
doing
talking about.
domestic violence. That, you know, if you had a list of questions for that domestic violence,
Yeah, we
that
have
new
some
attorney.
incubator attorneys we're working with who are all doing.
Yeah, no, I could see that as being useful. So. All right, let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break. Okay? That the last thing we looked at, which is the we're going to be talking about is dealing with error checking. And what I think as being administrators of the program, one of the important things for you all to know is what is error checking, where is it, how do you control it, and what does it do? I think that's really important because, especially if you're an administrator, from a standpoint of actually being administering the program, you want the data that goes into the system to be as clean and as correct as possible. Now, it's not going to be possible to obviously check the gender of the client, but you can check to make sure that it falls within a list of things. You can't call the client up and make sure that that's their area code, but you can make sure that it's a valid area code that was put in. There's all that, is this their correct address? Well, there's ways you could go to the internet, but it would be just so burdensome. You just have to say, okay, we're going to assume that the client or the intake person is going to type it in. Let's talk about where error checking can occur because it's important to understand. Error checking can occur on a table level. That means it's in SQL Server. What that means is that when we put in a particular field, let's take, for example, office numbers, okay? What we can do is use a foreign key, what is called a foreign key, to make sure that the entries into that field are correct. Foreign key sounds so difficult. All it means is that it's going to look over at another table in the system, sub-office, and it's going to use that, and if the value isn't in sub-office, it's not going to let you put it in. Same with reason closed. It's going to go and look at sub-R closed, and if the value isn't there, it's not going to let you put it in. Now, James, in my office, was managing attorney and the tech person for Southern Missouri for I don't know how many years. He trained for me for free for about 9 years, and he's been working for me for about 6. I'm not sure. I think he's working for me. Sometimes I feel like I'm working for him. But he insisted that what we do is really tie things down so that anything that could be validated was validated, that we set up a foreign key. So funding codes and all these things, you just can't put in garbage anymore. It just doesn't allow it. That made it hellish to do the conversion because a lot of your data was really bad. So we had to go through and either clean it out or put in a substitute value or whatever. Not only can you do the foreign key where it refers to a different table, but you can also do something called constraints. And constraints means that you can do a list in SQL Server. And for example, instead of saying we have a gender table, we just switched to a gender table, but instead of saying that, we could set up a constraint on that field. And the constraint basically would say only allow M, F, T, G, or any other values that we want. And if people tried to put anything else in, it just wouldn't allow it. So there isn't an existing table it refers to. It's a little list that sticks next to it. Those are the two major ways that you validate in SQL Server, okay? And so, for example, if you want to add a new office and you tell your staff person, put in Office 6 on this intake, and it pukes on you, says, I won't let you do it. Well, at least you know that's probably because it says foreign key, it means it's not in the sub-office table. So you just have to go to set up tables. Remember how we did that to find canned notes? You would go to set up tables here, admin, set up tables here, and office shows up multiple places, so it's going to be under multi. And here's offices. And you double click and you put in your new office. Well, this is kind of good anyway, even though it's not directly dealing with error checking, because I just showed you how you could go in and put in most of the values. I also should tell you, unfortunately, Linda is not here because she would be packing a gun. And she would say, if you go in here and you put something in, you better clear it with her first, okay? And that really does make sense because it keeps everybody in sync. Because if there is a new funding code added, it probably needs to be added across all programs so you guys are running in sync. So you
Well, I
don't-
think the thing
No, it
is,
doesn't need to
no,
be
I think
added.
that she doesn't want us to say, add a code that somebody else is using for
Well,
something
that's what I was gonna
else.
say, you know, if your code 15 meant this, and somebody else's code 15 means
else. I
something
got it.
else,
I'm
it could be,
reading.
you
Yeah.
could get inconsistent reporting and things.
Yeah.
Like staff members too, you know, I'm John Kemp, number 1 in one database, but in some other database, somebody else is number 1.
She has, delegated setting up new staff.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, I'm not speaking for her, I'm just warning you.
Yeah, yeah, we got it.
Yeah, you know, Linda's, you just make sure you guys are clear on how to deal with it. Okay, not only can you limit things on a table level, but you can limit things on forms inside of Access. On your pull downs, there's a choice to say limit to list. One of the problems I had was I did that, thinking people won't put in bad values. They can't on the form because it won't let them. You know, it'll say it's not in the list, you can't do it. Somehow people got around it and put in bad values. And so the table level you can't get around. But if it's a form value and you look at the table directly, you could type in whatever you wanted there. You see what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Because it's the form that limits it. If we take a look at a client intake, I'll show you what I'm talking about. I mean, this is important for understanding, you know, how to deal with bad entries or, you know, why it doesn't allow something to go in. If I go, notice how I'm doing this off of the touch tiles. We had discussions for 2 days in a row about using the book versus touch tiles. And I think I got the first group to agree touch tiles was good. I think I got the second group kind of on the way there. And so touch tiles is exactly the same as the book, but it's better, it's got more things on the main menu. Do the thumb up again. There you go. There's testimony. All right. So if what we do is we do show all here, and we pull up Melanie Fredrickson. And what we do is we go to closure here, and we go reason closed, and I type in Z, okay? And then I hit enter. It says the text you entered isn't an item on the list. Well, that means I've got that set to limit to list on the form.
We need you to take K out of there.
Oh.
LSC is told us, never use
Oh,
K.
no.
Can you just take it out?
Yeah, you could, as long as you don't have any values in there. If not, you can,
There's the old one.
Oh.
That's the problem.
that's what I just said. That's a good point. Can I address that in just a second? Okay. I want to finish this sentence. I'm working for you. In some instances, you can have this checking 2 ways. This is checking the pull down list, and I'm saying limited to list, okay? But if you went into the table and just did a table view and tried to put something else in, there's also the constraints or foreign key in SQL Server. So I got you both ways, you know. They can't sneak around it this time because, you know, we screwed it down really, really tight, okay? So you could have multiple ways of checking. You can also check by code in the background. That's really problematic. We had that years ago. Remember Glenn Rowden used to train for me. They actually hired him from one of my trainings, LSC did. And Glenn couldn't figure out why it kept changing citizenship to be no or yes, I can't remember which it was. And it turns out we had put it behind in the code, behind the form, that it automatically did that if you did something. And so that's kind of a hard thing to catch. Putting it in code, we don't do it as a normal course of things to change values in a field or prohibit certain values based on code. Generally, we don't. There might be situations where we say, if this field is this, then it only allows something over here that complies with it. But generally, it's hard to maintain that type of thing. Now, that brings me to your question, and this applies to about 55 other tables. Okay, if I go in here and I look at a table, incidentally, F11 will open up the navigation pane. Okay, If you don't see it, F11 will open up the navigation pane. These are the keys to the kingdom. You don't want to don't let anybody see you press it now and then. If I go in here and I pull up any sub-program, let's pull up sub-reason closed is perfect. Oh, let's talk about naming. I always assume everybody knows what we're dealing with here. There's certain naming conventions throughout the system. In tables, sub-tables are generally tables that are supporting tables, such as sub-funding, sub-office, sub-main benefit, or sub-outcomes. Those are all usually things that show up in pull-downs, all right? Things that have YYs in them, I think, are based upon the interview system. YMs are the internal messaging tables. Zs are your special programs. So if you had VAWA, there would be a Z VAWA table. If you had Z Title III, that would be your Title III special program. So Zs, pick that up. Most of the major tables just have a name like calendar or clients W or time. Now eligibility, which used to have most everything on just eligibility, you now have eligibility. You have eligibility adverse because you can have an unlimited number of adverse parties. You have eligibility income because you can have an unlimited number of incomes. You have eligibility expenses because you can have an unlimited number of expenses. You have eligibility assets because you can have an unlimited number of assets. And you have eligibility notes. So some people that were in here were talking about my queries don't run anymore. They're old queries. Well, they can't if it's on eligibility because the stuff is stored in different tables than it was in the past. Because to get the ability to have an unlimited number, we had to move some of the things to tables like eligibility assets. You can put an unlimited number in there now for a case. You don't see it when you fill out the eligibility slip. It looks like it's all there, but it's being stored in separate tables. Okay. But that's not what I wanted to show you. Let's go into sub-reason closed. And this applies across the board, like I said, to probably at least 50, if not 100 tables. Sub-arm closed. All right, if I open up sub-reason closed, what's the first column? It's the reason closed, right? And the second column is the description of what it is, right? And if you want to see it, you can drag it open and say save it, and it'll save it so you can see it better.
We also never use C, D.
Right? You can't because they're prohibited.
Yeah.
It's
There
the
we go.
third column.
Zeros.
The third column are the keys. The third column, current R stands for,
Got
is it a current record? If you wanted to shut off K, what would you put next to K?
A zero.
Right. And it would no longer show up on the pull downs. Okay? And since there's a limit to lists, it's okay there, it's okay for being there for old historical purposes. It's just like CDEIJ. Remember, they've gotten rid of CDEIJ. Well, but it's still here because your old data might have
Right.
CDEIJ as closure
Right.
reasons. But people can't choose them because it says they're not a current record.
Just do it.
That's in about 50 of the different tables. Let me give you another example. Let's say you have multiple offices or visitation sites and you close one of them down. Well, you can't remove it because you have data in there showing these clients came from that office. But what you can do is go into sub-office, go into current R, and put in 0. That means it will no longer show up on the pull down, and it also means that nobody can choose it.
I don't see R on this
For reject? Yeah, some people don't use it. Some people do. That's case type anyway, usually. Some people use it as a
one.
reason
There's a
closed.
closing, yeah.
Well, see, it's not a recognized, it's your own. I've got here deselected or rejected. You see?
Yeah,
All right.
X means something different to us than R does.
Okay, let's go ahead. So look for that. If you see that current R and you're wondering what it is, it shuts it off for the pull down. okay? And that can be really useful. All right, now, when we talk about error checking, there's validation that you can do behind a form. We said that. Let me go in here and say, yeah, see, it doesn't allow me, I gotta get out of it. If I go into design view here, let me do that up here, design view. If you feel nauseated, put your head down, take deep breaths. One of the things that we do is we have a protocol now for invisible fields. So if you make certain fields invisible, we ask that you color them red, because that makes it very easy to tell if a field has been made invisible. Otherwise, you have to go each field or keep going back and opening it up, the normal view, and then going back and looking. And you know, this way it's very clear that these two fields have been made invisible. Do you want me to show you how to make something invisible? I mean, it's very easy to do. And it's really cool because you can get fields that you don't use. Pro bono programs or volunteer lawyer programs. This can be very useful if you see codes in there that are just a pain. You don't use them. You just have to go through them. You won't see them anymore. Now, one thing I want to caution you, don't make a required field invisible unless it has a default in it that's valid, because it won't let you save the record for obvious reasons. This is a required field, office number. Let's make that invisible. Well, I can't save it, you see. Well, it's because you're not putting anything into the office because it's invisible because you can't see it. You could make it default to something valid and not worry about it. So let me show you how easy it is. Let's do something stupid. Let's make spouse's last name invisible. When a car goes in front of you down the street, it has certain properties. What properties might a car have?
4 wheels.
Whether it has 4 wheels, it has a license plate, it has the speed it's going, it has color, it has whether or not it has 4 doors or 2 doors. It has a whole series of properties. Everything in Access runs by properties also. So if what we do is we look at spouse's last name, if you right click, you can open up the properties box down here. Now guess what one of those now this includes all of these tabs, but if you know where to look, it's easier to just take a look at the individual tab. I didn't used to do that, but they kept adding more properties, so it's pretty easy to do now here. So if I click again, I'm on spouse's last name. What is one of the properties that's third down? Visible. It says,
Yes.
and we want it to say,
No.
all right, good. Now, if this label is attached to the field, in other words, if you move the field and the label moves, the label will automatically become invisible, so you don't have to make it invisible separately. Okay. So I'm going to change this to no. But see, if I go into the design view now, 6 weeks from now, and I don't do anything different, I won't know it's invisible. So what I want to do is color it so that I know that it's invisible. This might be a good time to make this uncollapsed here. So I'm going to go to Format here, and I'm going to fill the background with red. See? Now you can't do that with a checkbox, so what you do generally is color the label that goes with the checkbox. You can't change a button color, so you change the color of the text to red to see if it's invisible. Now if I open this up, watch what happens. It's gone. See it? It's just that easy. Not bad, is it? Let's turn it back on. I think that'd be a good idea.
Yeah.
Otherwise, when I train, people are going to start yelling at me. What happened to that? So I'm going to go to Design View. It remembers that the property's open already. So I'm going to change from visible to no to yes. Incidentally, remember I told you about if you made Office invisible, that you'd want to set a default to it? if I go over here to data, you can see down here default value. Now that's useful even if you don't make something invisible. For example, I heard somebody say, you know, we used to always have to type in the notes that we asked them about, do you have a chance of future income? Well, you could have defaulted the notes to, did the client tell you that they have a chance of future income? And then all the person would have had to write is yes or no. Or you could say, if they say yes, give some details. So you could have had the notes default to that just by typing it in. It's that simple. Watch, I'll default the spouse's last name to something goofy. If I go to format here, I need to change the background color to white because I have it red. That's gonna look dumb. So I'm gonna click here, and I'm done. So I'm gonna save it, except what I wanna do is make a default. And I'm gonna put the default value of Joe in, okay? I don't know why, I just picked that. And I'll save it. And now when I close it, and I open up my case, I'll pick open cases, that's just easy. Now, it doesn't show Joe. Why is that? It's because defaults only work on a new record. So in other words, if it had a last name in there or something, it wouldn't overwrite it with Joe. Defaults only work when you have a new record. So, how would I see if my default works? Well, I would hit add up here. That will open up a new record, and we'll see if it says Joe. There it is, Joe. See it?
Will it let you erase it?
Yeah, it's a default. You can write anything over if you want, yeah. But it just gives you that. Now, that allows you to do, if you think about it, there might be some useful things you could do with the defaults. What I'm going to do is change it back. Incidentally, while we're here, you see the conditional formatting that's going on? Do you want me to show you how that's done? And the reason is that conditional formatting allows you to put in your own colors on things to say this is an important field, whereas I might not think it's important because it's not important for everybody. It may be important for you. Example, SB Code 1, where you have to track urban and rural, let's say, and that's what you're using it for. And you want to make sure people fill that out. I could show you how to make sure it's red until the value goes in. It'll take me 5 minutes. Do you want to see it? Yes? No?
I feel like it's,
Yes.
I don't know that we're gonna be doing this.
All right.
I think it's saying that we'll add, if we want something like that done, ask Linda to do it.
Okay, then just knowing it can be done. And usually it takes, like I said, 5 minutes. What I'm gonna do is get rid of this so it's not this way, and then we'll move on. Design view. Yeah, see, null value, blah, 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 null. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna say design view, escape, escape. For those of you who weren't here, again, this isn't a new group to a large extent, except some of my regulars in the back and stuff, a couple in front. A single escape key will undo the content of the field that you're in. So if you hit the escape once, and don't ask me, I can't see where the escape key is on the screen, okay? It's the escape key on the keyboard, okay? A single escape, so if you started typing in a date over the birth date and you realized, oops, that's not where I want to put the date in, I want to put it into the file destruction date. As long as you don't exit the field, you can hit escape once and it will return the field to what it was before, okay? Now, if you hit escape twice, the escape key twice, it returns the whole record to the condition it was in when you first opened it up or when you last saved it. If you have a new intake sheet, you start filling it out and you hit escape, escape, what happens? She mumbled, it'll erase it. Yeah, it will. But if you're just on a single field and you hit escape, and you start putting in notes and you realize, oh, I'm overwriting something I didn't want to overwrite or something, you hit escape once, it'll undo it, okay? We talked about that in the fundamentals, but I thought I should mention it. Here, what I'm going to do is just get rid of this so I don't get into trouble. What I wanna do is go to design view, what I wanna do is go in here, I'm gonna click, I'm gonna say, get rid of the default here, and I think that's all, I already have the color okay, and I already have it in here, so I'll go ahead. Alright, what we wanna talk about, next, we were talking about error checking, is what I wanna do is talk to you about the, error alert, and how it runs and how it's modified and whatever. First off, there are a set group of stored procedures. Now, stored procedures are kind of like queries, but they're queries that sit on the server in SQL, so you don't see them. But they're extremely fast. That's why we can go through and check all of your cases for errors in a relatively short period of time. It's because it's running on the server and it just zippity-doo-dahs right through them, you know, and it's very fast compared to running separate queries. Now, the question becomes, there's a couple things that are involved. What happens if there's a test in there that I want to use that isn't being used? What happens if there's a test in there that I don't want to use that's currently being used? And the third thing is what happens if I really like the test but I want to modify it? All right? Those are the three kind of things I come up with. If we go to admin, and what we do is we go to utilities. This runs the error alert in the admin mode. This is extremely important because you have all of these buttons down here that nobody else has. All right? And those do a whole bunch of things. If you hit all errors, it goes through and checks for errors for everyone. Okay? And that's what we did after we put your data in. We ran through these, and that's why you guys didn't have 10 million per person errors on your screens, because we went through and corrected them as best as we could. Now,
Can I ask you a question?
sure.
On that point, there are some things coming up with errors that shouldn't have been coming up with errors. So for example, if we have a, let's say intake inadvertently opened a case and then rejected it, they would not go through and put in bogus information about address or phone number just to clear errors. I mean, if that could be resolved in the coding, I think it would be really helpful, because those.
It can be resolved. What you would
those
do,
showed up as
you would do, I
problems.
understand.
Yeah.
What you would do is you could say in the stored procedure where reason closed is not R. Assuming that's your reason closed, or X, or whatever you use. If you say, if it's not that, then it wouldn't check if it was reason closed X. But the reason we can't do that up front is because you use R, some people
We
use
use R for
X.
different reasons.
Yeah, but it's not that difficult. It's a where statement where it would say, if this, this, or this, or this, or this, and we would say, and reason closed does not equal R, then check it.
Got it.
So it's not bad to change.
So that's something we could figure out which ones we could really pull out that can help.
Correct. Another example is in list of parishes. Some folks in their counties will have a dash or an apostrophe. Like in Maryland, they have Prince George's County. Well, we can go in and there's a list of characters that we call unusual characters. We can just eliminate the apostrophe from there. It'll check for all the other unusual characters, but it won't throw an error. But that's because apostrophes in a parish name is very unusual throughout the country, and so we put it in to check for it, just in case, yes.
So another issue we've had is for SYNC cases, child in need of care cases, we frequently have children below age 1.
I think we fixed that.
Okay, so that's something that could be dealt with this way.
If we
as well.
haven't, we could. What we would do on that, I've already come up with a way to do it, is that what we would say is if the age is less than 0, then throw an error. Otherwise, go ahead.
Okay.
So that would allow you to put in 0.
But what if,
No, we're not going to allow negative
No, I'm talking about people that are too old that they have died, like somebody occasionally might type in,
100.
you know, they're 100 and something years old instead of.
Yeah, well, we have a top limit also.
You have a top limit too.
No, I think it's 107. Usually what we do is if you have errors in the system where you don't have an age and you don't have a birth date,
Right.
or we make it 107, and that way you know it's an error, but
Okay.
it also allows it.
Got it.
Okay, so let's look at what we can do here. You can clear all errors, but this is where you would pick which stored procedures you want. See that? So let's say that you didn't want to, you're not going to use the litigation screen. Well, you can see there's a whole list of things we test for. You see that?
Yep.
So the easiest way to find it for an admin is click here, do text filter, and say contains LITI for litigation, LITI, and hit OK, and there are the two. You see it? So if you don't want to use that, all you have to do is uncheck it here and uncheck it here, and it will not check for litigation in cases closed with an I. That's all there is to it. I don't think there's anything else I have to say. So the two things you can do is modifying it is going to be more difficult because we have to go into SQL Server and actually change the stored procedure. It's not all that bad, it's just you got to go back through and make sure we do it right. But turning it on or off is just a checkbox. So if there's tests in here that you just don't use, you can uncheck it. If you go through there and see that some are shut off that you do want to use, all you got to do is check it and you're okay. Is that helpful?
So what happens if we decide we wanna uncheck one of these and then for a later conversion, is that gonna cause problems?
Well, no, I mean, it just depends. I mean, some of these are, you know, as long as what we would do in the future is we would uncheck that for the future.
Okay.
So that if you didn't use litigation, we would move the check boxes over, assuming it's the same name for the stored procedures, and they would come in as don't use those. Okay? Okay, let's see what else we can do here. Oh, there are some other ways to check for errors. And you can actually add your own checks in there yourself if you want to. If you go to the report selector here, we go up to reports, and we go to the report selector. There's a section in here called error reports. You see it? For those of you who are at the earlier trainings, I will not use my bad joke a second time. Okay? I just want to prevent you from leaving. Okay, so if we go in here, you can have a near duplicates. And an example of a near duplicate is you go in and you sort by, let's say, name and problem code, and you find John Jones has 3 cases this year that were utility cases. Well, that's a near duplicate. Why? Well, it could be if it was water, 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 you can only count one of those. Does everybody understand that? Assuming it was substantially the same fact situation. Another example is client comes in February and has a pet, and the landlord is trying to evict them, and it was in their lease that they could have a pet, and they currently have a Chihuahua. Okay. Well, they get papers 2 months later, and they're being evicted for a child or for having the dog. Is that one case or 2?
Oh, wait, I didn't. I didn't get the difference. I thought you were still telling the same story.
I am.
Okay.
I've got a client who's got a Chihuahua. They come in January.
You said February.
And it's probably, I probably didn't phrase it correctly. And what they're doing is they're saying, you know, I want to know, so can the landlord throw me out? Because I
Got
thought
it.
it said in the lease.
Okay.
Okay. 2 months later, they come back in with papers saying that they're being evicted because they have a pet, a Chihuahua. Is that one case or 2 cases?
One.
It's one, because it's substantially the same fact situation.
Unless it's
In the same funding code period.
Exactly the same.
All right. Okay. Now, if a person comes in with a Chihuahua and then they getting eviction papers 2 years later, or 2 years, 2 months later, for having a 180-pound bull mastiff. Is that one case or two? Two, because the first one was a Chihuahua, the second one's a bull mastiff. They're substantially different facts, and so you could count them as two separate. Okay, so that's why it's called a near duplicate in here. Is that it? You know, if there were 3 utility cases, all 3 of them might be water about the same issue, but one might be water, one might be electricity, one might be gas. In which case, you could count each of those separately. But this gives you an indication that there's a problem. Another example would be, I won't do the joke, I promise. You know, if you have somebody with the same divorce, you know, coming in with a 32 during the same year, it's highly likely that's a duplicate case, unless they got remarried and want a separate divorce. You see, because it would be unlikely that, I mean, they might have come in for advice about a divorce, and then they might have come in actually for the divorce, and we might have had papers served on them, and they brought the papers in on that same person. Yeah.
This would give you a report on all of the near duplicate cases?
Yeah.
All of them, okay.
Yeah,
No.
if you hit it's in there now, it's
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
there, just hit the same.
Yeah, right here, you can do it based upon any of these things. And also, this, for the private bar involvement, volunteer lawyers, this is useful sometimes to see if you've got the same lawyer in there. A lot of times we find that you've put them in multiple times. So, you know, like there might have been one person in your position 3 years ago who just kept putting in the person over and over and over again or something, and this can pick up those errors. So you can also do some other error checking in here. Notice there's a PBI error check, no firm, PBI without lawyer, lawyers with no ongoing case. Those may not be necessarily errors, but they're useful to point out things for you. Same thing in here with error checking. You got no staff member in client's W, time, activity. Some of these things are impossible to do now because we screwed them down. So they will never find an error because it's impossible to put in a value because they've been screwed down. And so,
Isn't there one, maybe it's not in this section, maybe it's in the case client data, or, isn't there one with like, people with incomes over 125?
yeah, there is one
poverty?
somewhere, yeah. I'm not sure where it is.
Yeah, I think it's in the client case
Yeah.
data.
It might be under eligibility. Yeah.
It's one of those.
So you can add to these. You can go in and basically, I think these are just typed into there. So you could create some new queries and actually add them using the add thing. We're going to talk about that later. Okay, what else do we want to talk about on error checking? I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Oh, here's.
Can I tell
Go
you,
ahead.
can I ask you to show them something?
Yeah, go ahead.
Not as much error checking, I don't know if we're gonna talk about it, but it's very handy. So if, on the timekeeping reports, if you have staff that are on multiple grants, like I'm 50% this one, 50% that one, there's a little handy thing, time by advocate, by funding code or something like that. And they can sort of check daily, weekly, by pay period, monthly, whatever.
Well, let's go.
See if they're on track.
Yeah, it's staff code, funding code, I do it every case,
Yep.
period.
Okay.
It's really handy.
Very good.
Let's talk about finding reports real briefly, since we're kind of on that topic. We're going to come back to it later this afternoon. But what I want to do is, are people aware of the browse feature? Yeah, no, yes.
Yes, but it's so much stuff in there.
Let's
Hard
go
to
ahead
count.
and go, let me show you browse. If there's 3 ways of finding reports, these 3 utilities show the same reports, just different ways of finding things. And most people are comfortable with a search screen, so this is a search of all your reports. Now,
Talking about the preview search?
no. If we go to browse here, I want to see what time reports are available. I click on browse. What table do I look for? Time, right?
Whoa.
So I go down here to time.
Wait, you're just
Something
disconnected.
happened.
What? Didn't do anything.
Didn't say you did.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm not yelling at you. I'm yelling at
Okay,
it.
good.
No, I'm just saying, why is this remote view? I mean, I didn't do anything.
Maybe
Did it
it
come
lost
back up?
its connection or something.
Yeah, that's what it did. It's wireless. So let me download it again and see what happens. See, it's just all of a sudden it's doing crazy stuff. Not helpful.
Yeah, that's a boo.
I don't understand. I mean, it's not
Should
responding.
we go
to
get
them.
somebody who works here?
That wouldn't hurt.
Okay. Might have been a tornado or
Thank you, Lance. I'm just gonna go to the question.
Yeah, I mean, it could have been some interference. Just, wireless. That's why I always like to be hardwired. It's just, you don't have to worry about something I'm not seeing any of that up there. Auto projection is off. Auto projection, audio projection.
Donna's on it, she's going to get some.
Oh, good, great, thank you. I mean, what I could try doing is downloading it again. And we should be good right here. So I have to just kind of pick up from whatever I was talking about. What was I talking about?
Browse feature. Browse.
Thank you, very good. Yeah, the browse feature. For those of you who are trying to find reports, this is probably the easiest way. If you go to browse, and that's also on the tree view here, if we do browse and we look for reports on time, all we have to do is go down to the table called tea time here, and then we say browse, and what it will then do is in the lower corner here, it'll tell you how many reports there are, 37, and then what you can do is you can go through them one at a time and find one that does what you want it to do. See that? And then, not only what's new with the latest version of Prime is that you don't have to go back to the list of reports to run it. I've added a button that allows you to run the report from here, which makes it a lot easier because you don't have to go back, try to find it in the list, and then try to run it. This is just a much better way to do it. Now, while we're here, let's talk about an important feature that you need to know about. We're going to talk about it more in depth later, but if people want to add this to their favorites, or if you want to add it to your favorites, or we're going to talk later about how to add it, or how Linda can add it to the list of recommended reports. Linda, are you guys going to lock down recommended reports or allow it to be handled office by office? You'll take that under advisement.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll
All right.
not that far.
All right. Yeah. And so you will have, if Linda allows it, you will be able to adjust it. But do you see this button right here? You don't see it here. I'm sorry. But if you go back, we do close here. You see, if you find the report in here and you want to add it to your favorites, you just click here and you go to add to my favorites. When you click that, what it will actually do is it will put it in your list of favorites. Your favorites are available on the Today screen. So if I go to View, and that's the opening screen, and I go to Today, what you've got is recommended reports. This is what I was referring to when I was talking to Linda. And you also have my favorites, so you could add it in there for yourself. So you said, oh, I always run this. Well, this would be a perfect place to put it because you don't have to find it. You just go to the Today screen and it's right there.
Thank you.
And so it's just a lot easier. Also, because it's utilizing the same table as all the other reports are stored in, if you hit preview, you can still get a preview of what it's going to look like. So you can be sure that's what you want. And so that can be very, very useful. So browsing, did you want me to walk through the browsing again for folks?
Yeah, the browse.
Okay. Browsing is available from, I think, at least 2 of the report finders. And let's go ahead and show you where you find those. I'm going to start from scratch. You can do it from here, or you can do it from up here. I'm going to do reports. I'm going to go from report search here. What you see is there's a button called browse. When you click on browse, it asks you, what table are you wanting to report on? I said time. Let's say calendar. If I click on, well, let's do time again because that's a good one. If I click on time and I hit browse, what it then does is it brings up the first report. Down here in the corner, it tells you there's 37 reports that are available. To go through them to the right, you go like this with the arrow. If you want to run one of them, there's a run report right here. If you want to go backwards, you can go backwards this way. Okay? It's a very quick way to find reports. If you're saying, gee, I really want to run a report that does X, this is a really nice way of doing it, because what you'll find is, oh, hey, this is exactly the kind of report that I want. And you don't just have to look at the wording. There is the wording that's available here, as you can see. Input timesheet here. So you still have a description, but you also have the actual picture. See, time by funding code right here. So you actually have the picture in here that will actually tell you what the report does. Okay? Is that helpful? All right. Are there any other questions on error checking or error reports? I think we said that you could add new stored procedures. I didn't say adding them, but that could be done. One reason we can't do it is because many offices have things that are specific to that office or organization or state. So, for example, if you have the Bar Foundation saying that you have to report on certain things, you could build in a stored procedure that would check those things. North Dakota, Gail Coleman up there, has somewhere in the neighborhood of 170 stored procedures. James, before he joined me, had like 160 in southern Missouri, checking not only the ones I put in, but then adding ones that were specific to his individual program, checking things that he needed. And so you guys could do that. You could add stored procedures that said, if the client lived in a particular parish and they were over the age of 60 and they had a problem that was housing, then it should be funding code 12. And if it isn't, say, this client is a senior with a housing problem in Orleans Parish, and it isn't funding code 12. See? And it would be fairly easy to, you know, you just steal it from, or we can do it for you, or Richard can do it. But you can add additional stored procedures. Because I know people love to get that list of errors in the morning. Well, the cool thing is I asked at the training, Linda, there's a lot less errors showing up now, and everybody goes, yeah. And I said, maybe the program isn't working. You know, what it is that people are a lot more careful if they know they're going to be dinged the next morning for that error. You all are aware that one of the major changes is that it actually error checks from the intake sheet now, and actually error checks from the eligibility sheet. You may not be aware of that. Let me show it to you very quickly. Let me show you a disastrously horrible intake sheet, my favorite. So I'll go to, let's just do here, client search, and last name is HM apostrophe HM asterisk wildcard. There it is. So I'm going to go into it, double click. No, I don't need it to stay open. Now, I'm in this case. If I try to exit this case, it says, you have errors in the case. Are you sure you want to close? The county is missing. The state is missing. The case number begins with a blank. The first name begins with a blank. It's got a whole list in here. What you can also do here is you can run that error alert without exiting right here. If you click error alert, it'll do the same thing for you. And you can, in fact, still exit because you might, people always have a reason for making errors, like a good reason, you know, like client didn't bring me in the documentation, or it's a senior and the son came in to apply for his mother and he doesn't have that information or something. So you can still exit from these, but it does certainly ding the person right in their face to tell them that these are bad things. And so the same tests that we run on startup are run on the eligibility slip and are run on the client slip. So you get dinged up front so you don't have to see it tomorrow if you correct it today. Does that make sense?
But it'll still let you close it out.
Yeah, I can say, do you still, it says here, do you want, sure you want to close? Yes, and I'm out. You can't do that if it's a totally required field. You know, and that's where you get the blah, 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 case num, blah, 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 no, blah, blah, blah. You missed the blah, blah, blahs from the last two sessions, but she was at the first session. So a lot of times you get these error messages. Let me show you one here, and then we'll take a quick break. if we go into time badge, okay, and let's say I do this and I say that it's a matter, and then I click here. Everybody's seen that, right? All right, this is what I'm talking about. Most people will see that and they will immediately feel nauseated and they will avert their eyes, okay? What we've learned in the first 2 sessions is you just say blah, 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 no, blah, 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 tea time. Oh, it's saying I left the amount of time blank. That's the name of the field, is tea time, the time. So, just ignore all the blah, blah, blahs. Look for the name of the field. If it says no, it means that you've left it blank. If it doesn't say no, it might say something else. Like in calendar, it might say the time that you entered, the beginning time is later than the ending time. I'll show that to you. Oh, incidentally, again, you have the tattoos from the first session, which is Kemp's first rule of survival. Linda was applying them as people were leaving. Kemp's first rule of survival is read the screen. And Doug, yesterday, was my special guy for doing Kemp's second rule of survival, which is there's a button, push it, as long as it doesn't say delete, okay? And so the third one is more for programmers, which is steal it from Kemp. But in this case, what you'll see up here is it says, escape to exit an incomplete timesheet, okay? And that's what you've got here is an incomplete timesheet. And remember, over there in the corner, you were saying, oh, it's going to take it back to being empty. But it's pretty much empty anyway now. I mean, it is. So I'm just going to go escape, and I'm back. See it? And if I hit escape once, it might have just taken me back to the old sheet. But that undoes it. Let's take a look at another error message so I can show you more blah, blah, blahs. So if we go to scheduling, and we go to, is there a search screen area here? Oh, no, that's the calendar. I want to calendar search right here, show all. One of the differences in the search screen for calendar, again, this is a different group. A lot of you weren't on the first day or second day training. You can actually edit certain things here so you can change your schedule very quickly. But you're not going to change it very quickly if you change this to 28 and then you move down and you get blah, 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 right? But don't panic. Just say blah, blah, blah. Start date and time must be before ending date and time. Well, that makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, you can't end the event today and have it start tomorrow, can you? So that's all it's telling you. And so what you do is you look and you say, oh, you know, I only changed the start date here. I didn't change the end date, so I'm going to change the end date here too, delete. And I'll change this to an 8 also, and now I can move down with no problem. See? So don't panic, look at it and read. Incidentally, on the calendar, since you guys are advanced and you weren't here for a lot of you weren't here for the first 2 days, the calendar requires you have a beginning date, beginning time, ending date, ending time, and a reason. And the reason that you have to have those fields is the system now will sync with Office 365 in 2 directions. But to do that, it has to have those fields to do the sync. Okay? So Office 365, most of you are aware, is Office in the cloud. And so you can, in fact, sync this with the calendar in Office 365. Let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break, and then we'll start back up. Is this making sense to everybody? Are you doing okay? You getting something out of it? I once did a training where somebody had candy in the front row. And I said, did you bring enough for everyone?
And they did.
No, but they had the perfect answer. They said, no, but I brought enough for you. So, that's like I told you the Tim Watson story. Tim Watson used to work for the corporation. They hired him from one of my trainings also. Did you know Tim, Linda? Really funny guy from Tennessee. But that was the guy who, he wasn't paying attention during the lecture. So I said, Tim, what do you think about that? Or asked him, what answer is that? And Tim, you know, most people would say, I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention. And Tim just kind of looks at me very seriously in a room with 60 people. And he says, you know, I can't help but think that we're all naked under our clothes. And the whole room went down. You know, I lost total control for about 10 minutes. It was Tim's really, he's the guy who also did an outline called Dealing with John Kemp, Son of Satan. And it used every possible font, you know, in italics and bold and everything. It was an amazing document that was handed out. The next thing that we're going to be dealing with here are form letters and smart duplication. Hopefully we can get through that pretty quickly so we get to lunch on time. Let's start first with form letters. Everyone can use form letters. When we give permissions to whether or not they can create new ones, all right? In the sense of new kind of formats of form letters. And you can give form letter permission without being an admin. If we go into admin here and we look at staff settings and we look at staff roles here, as you can see, you can set permissions so that you can give somebody the rights to letters, to grants, donations, trusts, getting into staff member, getting into PBI functions, doing vault, and checking online intakes. That can be all done separately from overall. Admin, number one, takes into account everything else, but you can break it down to some extent on those other things. Let's first talk about how a form letter works, and then what we're going to do is take a look at how to add them or change them. Okay? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to the Touch Tiles main menu, because right there is Client Search. Incidentally, we could change this or add some additional bars or touch tiles to speed things up if you guys had ones that were you know, really necessary that you used. We tried to pick the things that we thought were most important here for speed, the quick column we call it. So if I go to Client Search and I say Show All, and I click and I get Jeremy Flugel, that's a good name. Perhaps he invented the Flugel horn, who knows. Anyway, there are form letters available for online intake. There are form letters available for eligibility, and there's form letters available for clients. There aren't form letters available for callback. Does anybody know why?
Yeah, they're not open yet.
No, there's no address. In callback doesn't have an address, city, state, zip, so you can't do form letters on it. But online intake, you know, the person should have given you that. Eligibility, you can put that in, and clients, you definitely need it in. So let's go ahead and look at some of the features. There's a very important change James put in that we do want to look at. If we go to page 3 here, if we go to form letters, what we do is we get this marked as safe. You can still go ahead, but it says this is the, do I want to send a letter to a domestic violence client where the abuser may be opening her mail. You know, and that's, obviously that's very dangerous. So during your interview, if you in fact do this on page 1, is this address safe? Can we send you things here? Yeah, that's fine. You know, it is safe. Then when you go to do the form letter, you don't get that warning at all, you see? You could still go ahead, but that's why it's there, to sort of ding you to think, oh, is this a safe place where I can send letters to? All right, the first thing you do is you choose a letter. And if I choose a letter here, I'm going to just do an opening letter. Obviously, you should experiment with these. For example, if this is a PBI case, you can send letters to the lawyer that lists the client information, and if it's a client letter, obviously it just goes to the client, but it allows you to send letters out to the lawyer. How many people use, as kind of a side issue here, how many people use the multiple print box? You do? Okay. What it allows you to do is print out 4 or 5 things at once. If you check a bunch of stuff in here and hit print, it'll print out all those forms all at once for you. So you might want to look at that also. So you might print out, for example, a citizenship agreement, the intake sheet, the eligibility sheet, and an opening letter. You can do it all at once. So look at that. Here we're going to choose the opening letter. Most letters have the same things in common, staff opening. Do you see the last column in here where it says standard? That's a column that you can use. The letters are stored, the text or body of the letter is stored in a table called Forms L. So you can go into that table directly, Forms L, and modify that column. Now why would you modify it? Well, you might have Linda's letters, okay? Or you might have Unit 1's letters, or you might have Vietnamese letters, or you might have Spanish letters, or you might have Joe's letters. You can use anything in there to group them and make it easier to find the letters and not have to scroll through a long list by just looking at that last column. For PBI, you might have intake letters, closing letters. You know, it really doesn't matter what you put into that last column. It's for your own convenience that allows you to see letters quickly and group them. Do you understand? Okay, so I'm going to choose, I put in standard because I didn't know how you'd want to use them, and right now they probably all say standard. If I go in here and say L staff open, that's the opening letter, add text comes up. Now this is incredibly important because it allows you to customize the letter very easily. You can actually put in canned notes that you've used, and if the canned notes are written in English, the person gets in writing what some of their rights are. So let's say that I've advised, the example I usually use is the example having to do with wills. Let's say I've advised this client having to do with handwritten wills. I can go in here to my canned notes that I've maybe already put into my canned notes, and I'm going to scroll down until I find wills. And what I can do is click here, and I can change this. It's not written in English, probably not grammatically correct either, but it was written not by me. So I'm going to say, I advised you about holographic wills, competency. Now I can put that on the top of the letter or at the bottom of the letter. I'll leave it at the bottom. I can choose my letterhead here. I'll pick Maine. I can spell check. This allows me to pick a different signature line. You couldn't do that in the past. It had to be signed by the advocate of record, the staff number that you put. Now this allows you to pull up all current employees, and we'll have Adrian Monk sign it. Now if you just do print preview, what ends up happening is it does a print preview, but it will only put this into your case notes, the additional stuff that you've added. However, if you do edit full letter, you can change anything you want, anything. So the letters cease to be form letters and they become suggested letters. So I can say, please don't give all important papers. Okay? I'll say, please don't give all important papers. I could add a paragraph here, which same one I used the other day, yada, yada, yada. Okay? I can change to move things around. I could paste other things in. I could do virtually anything that I wanted to do in the form letter. That makes it extremely, extremely flexible. Now what I do is I generate the letter. And this is where you can save the full text. I'm going to do that, yes. But this is where the magic occurs. James has given you this, which is archive it. So you could print it out and then you can archive it. What it does is it changes the letter into a PDF form and it drops it into document as tracking, and it's stored in a field in a table in SQL Server. So it's pretty cool. So if I do that, having said that, watch it blow up. Now I tested it. Archive it. See it? Archiving complete. Client document tracking in the case to, check document tracking in the case. That's the dark side of James. He wants you to make sure it's in there. Say okay. So you've got this letter. So I'm going to close it now. And what I'm going to do first is show you how I put the letter into case notes. Remember, to update it, I can hit edit. And what you're going to see is right here. let's zoom it so you can see it better. This letter confirms, yada, 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 please don't give all important papers. I advise you about holographic wills. So you save that in your actual case notes. However, what we did with that new ribbon bar that was added is if we go, somebody was asking, I think you were asking about document tracking. If we go to page 2 here, when you go back in from notes, sometimes it asks you that. If you go to page 2, there's document tracking. If I go in here, you see printed letters. If I click on printed letters, there's the letter that was stored. If I click here, it allows you to do some indexing of it. So you could store it and say, see, my idea on document tracking is because there's a search screen for documents in the system, you can use this to brief bank, automatically brief bank. And you can actually tag something in here as being priority 1 for brief bank, so that people not only store the documents, but they let you know that this is, let's say, a memo about fires in apartment houses. And so if you have a problem with a fire in an apartment house, you can go to the search screen and look for the word fire in the description, and you find that memo, and you might be able to modify it and make it better and use it in your case. The whole idea is not to reproduce the wheel or recreate the wheel. So here, though, I'm not going to add anything. You see, you can categorize it, and you probably, if it was landlord, tenant, or wills, you'd put it under wills, and you could do a subcategory, which is I think the National Index Code. You could put a note in, and you could say, this is not storing the path, it's actually in SQL Server. If I want to open the file up, now, I am currently, you will see during this next action, at no time will my fingers leave the ends of my hands. If I hit open file, what it's going to do is it should open up whatever, it says it doesn't know what I want to use. I'll use Edge right now. I'll say okay. And what it'll do is open up that document so I can see it. There it is. Thank you. I haven't trained these people yet. I need ooze. I play with the ooze. If I don't get ooze, I get cranky. Okay? And as I said to people the last 2 days, I will accept a Louisiana substitute. Like coastal California's dude, and inside of California's way cool, and Alabama's yeehaw. So I will accept a Louisiana substitute too. So it's very nice. It stores it internally. Now, having said that, we've seen how the document tracking works.
How do you get it to put your letterhead in there?
That's part of the training.
Oh, okay.
All right, we've seen how we can generate a letter. And the next thing is how do we create a new one or modify an existing one. As I said, you can give out permission for that. It's under here, under admin, under letters form. And here you have modify letter. And you might see something that says modify letterhead, but you might not. If we do modify letter here, we can change the letter. And if I went down to staff opening letter, right here's the letter, and you can just type in what you want it to say, and it'll say that for everyone. If you want to add a new letter, guess what you press up here? Add. You can then take your Microsoft Word letter, copy it, and paste it into the text area, and use that. So you could convert, assuming you don't have any embedded fields in it, you could move all of your form letters that you use in Microsoft Word into here in a relative. I think I say it takes 26 seconds. I think it would take Linda 5, but yeah.
So if I need to modify a pre-existing form letter, I can go to administration and admin and letters and forms?
Yep.
And modify the
Yep.
form letter?
And it'll be modified for everybody in the program, in your organization. Yeah. But you don't want to. If it's just a temporary change for a particular letter, I showed you how to do that already on the fly. Remember, you just asked to say, edit full letter, and you can go in and change it on the fly. This is for the core.
Yeah, okay.
Is everybody following me so far?
Yeah, where's the document tracking found?
Page 2. That allows you to enter any documents you want.
At the bottom, on that page.
Okay, you can duplicate a letter, you can cut and paste, you can do all kinds of stuff in here. I think that you just experiment with it and you can deal with it, okay? Let's say now that you want to modify something beyond the content of the letter. Does everybody feel pretty comfortable? They know where to find it, they can hit add and add a new letter, they can edit an old one, right? Everybody's okay with that?
You're not there yet, but I have a question on the envelope. I'm having problems with envelope.
Yeah, you have to redo probably the form.
What now?
You have to redo the form because a lot of times it won't save except as a full page. And if you save it, if we save it, if you move it to another printer, you end up with problems. So yeah, you might want to look at, there might be some stuff in Microsoft about how to deal with that. Because I found that I'll create an envelope with the proper size and then we move it to another organization, the size of the envelope changes. You know, it changes to a 8.5 by 11 or something. It's something in Microsoft. Let's talk about the questions about how do we modify the system itself. Two major things. How do we modify how the actual letter is, what fonts are used, etc. And how do we modify the letterhead?
Yeah.
So, all letters are reports, and it's basically, we're doing document assembly here because it's grabbing the problem code from the sub-P code, it's grabbing the body of the letter from Forms L, it's grabbing the client's address from the client's W table. If it's a pro bono case, it's grabbing the lawyer's address from the lawyer's table. It's grabbing the staff member information from the staff member table. And so it's grabbing stuff from all over the place. And if you add text, it's adding that text from the little box that you put it into. Remember where we put in the information about wills and things? So all of those things are being brought together. All form letters will begin with R-let. So if I look for R-let, you see there's a whole bunch of them. Where do you think this one goes to? Goes to agencies. Yeah, R-let client. That's the one that you probably need to look at. This is contributor, this is conflict, this is probably adverse party, because there's no conflict, wouldn't have an address for the client in it. So if I look at this design view, this is the letterhead right here. We're going to talk about that in a minute. It's a sub-form. So if you modify the letterhead for one record, it's going to be modified for everything, for all the letterheads that are in there. I'm trying to get it to click on the outside and it will highlight the subform. There it is. It's all outlined in yellow now. I don't know if you can see that. Yeah, you can. So that's a subform. You can see here that there's got some programming. If the gender is M, what do you put in? Mr. Otherwise, put in Ms. Put in the client's address. Put in the city, state, and zip code. Put in the problem code name. If sex is M, say Mr. and then last name, otherwise. If you click here, you can go over here and see what it says in the properties. Let me give you a tip. Now, I don't know, my eyes are getting better as I get older, not. But if you right click here on control source and zoom, you can do this most of the time. What you can do is open up a box. What's important here is you can change the font on it to, let's say, 14 and say OK, and it's a lot easier to see and work with. It's a real nice thing to have. It will remember the font size change for the rest of your session, usually. So if you need to look at stuff, see if it says, if sex is M, make it Mr., otherwise make it Ms., and the client's last name, and a comma. That's all it's saying there. Okay. Let's say what I wanted to do is I wanted to change my margins. Well, I could go up here and do page setup and deal with, in fact, changing margins and stuff in here. I'm not sure if we do it up here. I don't remember where to do it. I haven't done it for a while here. But what you would do is it's just basically like doing Word. But you would have to make sure you would have to size these boxes so that, in fact, they would in fact fit inside of your new size. Some people have done so much as to move these in quite a bit and put a left margin with a line going down with a list of all their local offices on the side. You could do all kinds of super duper things, or you can change fonts. You know, if you click inside of the box here, one of the properties is in fact fonts. I don't know if we do that through format, I think we do here. You can see it's Times New Roman 12. You could just click here and change it into any other font that you wanted. Make sure everybody else has it. But that allows you to mess around with the spacing, mess around with how things look. This puts either the beginning text either at the top or at the bottom. Here's your sincerely. If you didn't want to have the phone number of the advocate, you could make that invisible. Generally, you don't want to delete things. You want to make them invisible because sometimes coding expects something to be there. And if you delete it and the code runs, it says, where is this? It's gone. And it won't run. So if you make it invisible, it's happy. It doesn't care if you can't see it. It can, so that's all that's important. So, do you understand how you go in and you can mess around, change fonts, move things around, size the boxes?
How do you get the logos in?
We haven't gotten to the letter.
Oh, we're not there yet, okay,
Not there
we're
yet.
there.
Okay, be patient. Now, there's help built into the system that's going to tell you all of what I'm telling you here, but it's going to tell you it all in detail. If we go to help here, and we click on knowledge base here, and we type in the word, guess what, letterhead. It's going to tell you, and there's the topic. I'm going to double click on letterhead. What it's going to do here is tell you everything I'm going to tell you right now. You can also type in form letter, and there's form letters, and it's going to talk about this. It talks about importing form letters, modifying margins, sending format letters singly and in bulk. So there's a bunch of stuff in here that's really good. Now, the letterhead exists as a sub-form, and it's a report called sub-letterhead R, I believe. Sub-letterhead R right there. Now, there are 3 ways that you might want to modify it. Oh, see, it's saying it's already open. It doesn't like opening it up twice. It's open in here because it's not sure who wins when a change is made. Now it should open up. Design view. Right here. This is the letterhead. Normally, what it would do is it gets the information from the table called subprogram. You could change these margins. You could change the fonts. You could change the alignment. It puts graphic 1 here. It puts graphic 2 over here. All right? Now, the first thing that you could do is change the content, and the way you would do that is you would go to admin, you would go to setup tables, and you'd go to subprogram, because that is where, let's find subprogram. I always have a hard time finding it. Here's letterhead, you might do that, add or modify, right here. If you change this, and there's 3 letterheads in here right now, if you change any of this, it will change the content of the letterhead. From the stand, you know, if you changed your address, you changed the zip, you changed the phone number. I'm getting there. I'm getting slowly.
I got it. Waiting
So
for
this
it.
deals with just the substance of what goes in. I already said if you opened up sub-letterhead R in the design view here, like we have, you could change the way it looks here and move it around and change it. Now the third method is that if you already have a graphic that you need and you want in there that includes, that isn't written just plain old in text, but it has, you know, flowers, or it has, you know, the scales of justice or whatever. One way you deal with that, and we've done it many times, is first thing you need to do is create a BMP. It's like a JPEG, but create a BMP format of that with the correct size to fit in here. Okay? So you want it to be this size. That will make your life much easier. Once you create that, what you can do is you can in fact make all of this stuff invisible. Just highlight everything at once. You notice how when I went to the top and dragged, everything that line touches gets highlighted. I can now go in here under Properties, Format, and it says Visible. I could make it not visible. I paste my graphic on top of it. I save it. It will now show you your new graphic format.
What about footers? We have to put 3 things at the bottom.
Well, why don't you just go in and read what you have to do is add a footer.
Okay.
And you can do that to the, if you read that help on modifying form letters and margins, I believe the format does allow you'd have to put it on each letter. And in this case, probably the most important one would be our lead client. That was one we were looking at earlier when we closed.
Right.
Our lead client here. And if we design that here, I believe there's an addition down here where you can put in, and I haven't done this for years, but I think you can go in here and add a footer to it without much trouble. It explains it in my notes on how to do it. There's formatting here. You see background image. There's arrangement, size and space. There's design, tab order, page numbers. That looks pretty good right there. Insert an image, logo, title. You see there's a whole bunch of things that you can fool around with in here, colors and things that you can put in this, put in a footer for you and put it in, and you should be good. One thing you have to be careful about is putting in a hard page return. Somebody had trouble where it wasn't printing out 2-page letters. And let me show you what to look for so you can take care of it yourself. If you find that something's only printing out 1 page, what you need to find is the hard page return. And let me show you where that is, or what it looks like. Let me see, it's design, I think. Where is it? Tab, no. They don't make it easy sometimes to find things. See, here's your margins, here's your landscape, columns, page setup, print. So all of this will help you out. What it is, what you end up seeing is about 5 dots when you put in a hard page return. And I'm trying to find it. It usually will show, this is it right here, I think. See that? Insert page break. If I click on that, and then click somewhere over here, it's very hard to see it, but it's in there right now. You see those dots right there? That's a hard page return. If you have trouble with printing multiple page letters, all you need to do is click on that and then just delete it. And usually that'll take care of your problem. So just hit delete like that. That was put in there for bulk letters, and I think they changed the way that they print. So now it will give you a separate, you don't have to have the hard page return. So if you say send letters out to all the domestic violence clients we've had in the last year, letting them know we're going to have a counseling meeting on September 2nd. We print out all those letters all at once using the QBS group.
Cool.
So that's kind of nice.
So like if there's a change in the law or there's a.
Yeah, you can let
something
people
like that?
know. Yeah, absolutely. I like when people think about that because a lot of times they don't. I mean, you can keep your clients informed.
Will it, okay, this might be too much, but if you've got the text feature, and let's say you were doing a community outreach and you wanted to notify all elderly people who you have a text message for about an upcoming community outreach, is there a way to do that?
James has it so you've got a pull down on text that allows you to put canned texts in. And I think one of them says that there's a meeting scheduled on, and you can type in the date.
And we can send it
It'll
as a
text
text?
that out.
Cool.
Okay. Let's talk about, that's all I'm going to talk about. Do people have a pretty good idea on form letters? How they work? And just remember, all of what I just told you is right under your help button here. Let me get out of design here. So let me get back to it. Yeah, it's under here, and it's going to be under your knowledge base here, okay? And you can can go into that. Some of the knowledge-based entries aren't totally up to date. I spent an inordinate amount of time. If anybody's looked or even weighed the technical documentation, it's 315 pages long with 400 screenshots with 15 addendums. I spent my time doing that rather than going back and trying to update these just because there wasn't enough time. But most of the information in there will still be good, okay? But it does put it at your fingertips, so it's easy to get at. All right, let's talk about duplicating cases, smart duplication. Duplication allows you to duplicate many things in a case. A lot of what has to be done is you have to make decisions, a lot of policy decisions on using smart duplication. Because there's things like duplicating the eligibility slip. That should, if you're a project director or manager or managing attorney, that should set out fire alarms in your head, okay? Duplicating eligibility. My staff is gonna pull up a 2-year-old case, duplicate eligibility and depend on it. Corporation will go after you because obviously a 2-year-old eligibility sheet, there might be less or more people in the house, the income might have changed, they might have won the Irish sweepstakes, there's a ton of things that could have happened. So part of what we're going to be talking about is dependent upon your policies in your offices, okay? Let's go ahead and look at it and then talk about setting things up and things. So the way that it works is if I go to client search, I'll say show all, I'll go down here, I'll pick one case, Lori M. Fritz, and when I open it up, what you'll notice is on the top line menu is a duplicate button. That brings up the smart duplication form. There are 3 types of duplication. The first one is where the standard one, and that would be the equivalent of the one you used to have in the old version where you just duplicated one thing, you just had one choice. And so when you click on it, what's new here is that it'll actually show you which fields get duplicated. It says these always get duplicated, except it adds a new case number. And then if you pick standard, these are the ones that will get moved over. Is everybody with me so far? That's the first method. The second method is where you pick a list that you've created, and you could have a list that would be for public benefits, a list that was for bankruptcy. It could be, whatever you wanted. You could create your own list of things that got duplicated so it fit the needs of the unit that was doing that. If I go in here and I pick duplicate list, I get a list of them here. And if I click on one of them, let's say I do the housing unit, it's going to do these fields plus living arrangements, address, and zip code. Again, I just put that in as an example. Okay. Now, you're going to ask me, how do those lists get put in, right? The way the lists get put in is by the third method. And the third method allows you to go in and select any field you want to have duplicated. So you could say, I want adults, I want citizen, I want children, I want contested. You could choose what you want. When you say duplicate, it asks you, do you want to save this list? That means you don't have to go through and click all those fields a second time if you save that list under a name, such as bankruptcy, such as domestic violence, such as whatever you want. And that's how that list gets put in. That where we saw Chris and we saw housing unit, we saw those things. That's how those lists get created. Does everybody follow me on that? So to recap, we have 3 different ways to duplicate a case. The standard method, which is kind of the old way. Second way, you can choose from a list. And the third way is you can actually select which fields are actually duplicated. Now, having said that, we can do some other things when we duplicate. One of the things that we can do is duplicate the case notes. If you put a check in that box, it will duplicate the case notes, so the case notes will be the same as the case that you're duplicating in the duplicate case that's created. Secondly, do you want to duplicate eligibility? Do you remember something I taught you earlier that might be very useful right now for that form? Remember how I showed you how to make things invisible? You may want to make that choice invisible, because you may not trust your people as, if your policy is you only duplicate an eligibility slip if it is 2 weeks old or less, then you might be afraid that they're not going to follow that policy. So if you made that choice invisible, they just wouldn't be able to do it, would they? And let's say that you always want to duplicate case notes. Well, you could make that invisible, but you could change the default to true. So then it would always duplicate the case notes. So what I showed you earlier, about getting into design and changing it, is very powerful because it can allow you to change how the form will react. That's probably something you'd want to talk about at the case management users group for the state. I think that would be, something that might be good to talk about. You also have in here duplicating the family members. So if you use that, it would allow you to move your family members over. If you remember, on the client intake, there's a tab that says family. It would duplicate that. Excuse me. And also, what it allows you to do is go in here and change the values on these fields, so when the new sheet opens up, it has those new values. So if I was redoing an intake sheet that she had opened up, I might want it to open up with my number, in which case I would change the advocate number to mine. You see? And that way I wouldn't have to go back and change it. If her case was a consumer case, but I was dealing with, let's say, a child custody issue for this client, I could change the problem code so when the new case opened up, it would open up with the new problem code in it, of child custody, rather than consumer. And the red, like special problem code. There is the ability to assign a custom number. That was done for Austin, Texas, the pro bono program there. They had an old system that required they had certain numbers that they would put in manually, and they didn't want it to just use the normal numbering system, so they could put in their own custom number, which to me sounded like a real problem, but it will do that if you need it. And then you just press the duplicate button, and it will actually go in and duplicate things. So it'll go in, and reason has been assigned to case notes, and you want to start time? No. And what you'll see here is now I have a duplicate of Lori Fritz. And if I go to case notes here, you see it says this case is a duplicate, was duplicated on this date. For some reason there's no eligibility. It could possibly be a duplicate of an earlier case. So do you know that if you click on eligibility backwards, it'll create an eligibility slip for you? So if you don't have an eligibility slip on this and I hit eligibility, it'll open up a new eligibility slip. It might put in the old income, but it could go through then, erase that, and just go through and ask the questions necessary without having to retype all of that information. Remember, I didn't say that. I think I didn't check which way. I think I did custom or something, so I didn't move over a lot of stuff in here that I should have. But if I do review eligibility here, watch. What it does is no existing eligibility one will be created, and so see. That's probably where what I've done is tried to move something in where I didn't have that value coming back. When I duplicated the case, I didn't say duplicate some required fields because I just did it quickly. And when I tried to go backwards to eligibility, it tried to write nothing into a required field, and that's why it puked. Had I picked standard duplication, it wouldn't have puked. Okay, that's all I've got on the two form letters and smart duplication. Are there any questions? Okay, let's break for lunch. Oh, look at that. I'm like within seconds of being